Sarah Matthews adjusted her designer purse and checked her reflection in the elevator mirror one more time. At 42, she had worked hard to maintain her appearance and social status in the upscale neighborhood of Riverside Hills. Her husband's successful law practice afforded them a comfortable life, complete with a sprawling house, luxury cars, and membership at the country club. But beneath the polished exterior, Sarah carried a burden that was slowly eating away at her conscience. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 7th floor of the medical building. Sarah stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She was here for her monthly appointment with Dr. Reynolds, though she had never told anyone the real reason for these visits. The waiting room was filled with elderly patients, some using walkers, others sitting quietly with their adult children beside them. Sarah took a seat near the window, deliberately choosing a spot away from the other families. She opened her phone and pretended to scroll through emails, but her eyes kept drifting to an elderly man in a wheelchair near the reception desk. His name was Henry Morrison, though Sarah knew him by a different title: her victim. 3 months ago, Sarah had been rushing through the grocery store parking lot after a particularly stressful day. Her teenage daughter had been caught cheating at school, her husband was working late again, and the housekeeper had quit without notice. Sarah was juggling grocery bags and talking loudly on her phone to her sister about her problems when she noticed the old man struggling to get out of his car. Henry Morrison, 78 years old and recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, was trying to retrieve his fallen wallet from beneath his car. His movements were slow and shaky, and he was blocking the parking space that Sarah desperately wanted. She had honked her horn twice, but the old man seemed oblivious to her presence. In a moment of pure frustration and selfishness, Sarah had done something that would haunt her for months to come. She had gotten out of her car, marched over to where Henry was struggling, and with a quick glance around to make sure no one was watching, she had given him a firm push. Henry had stumbled and fallen against his car door, crying out in pain and confusion. Sarah had immediately felt a shock of horror at her own actions, but instead of helping, she had panicked. She grabbed the wallet from under the car, shoved it at the confused old man, and hurried back to her vehicle. As she drove away, she convinced herself that he was fine, that it was just a small push, that no one had seen what happened, but someone had seen. A 7-year-old boy named Tommy Peterson had been sitting in his mother's car 2 rows over, waiting while she ran into the pharmacy. Tommy had watched the entire incident unfold, his young eyes wide with disbelief. He had seen the well-dressed lady push the sick old man, and he had seen how scared and hurt the man looked afterward. Tommy's mother, Lisa Peterson, was a nurse at the local hospital and had taught her son about helping people who were hurt or in trouble. When she returned to the car, Tommy immediately told her what he had witnessed. Lisa was shocked and concerned, but by the time she looked toward where Tommy pointed, both the elderly man and the woman were gone. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the frightened look on the old man's face and how the lady had just driven away without helping. His mother had explained that sometimes adults make very bad choices, but that it was important for good people to speak up when they saw something wrong happening. Meanwhile, Sarah had spent that same night lying awake, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. She had acted on impulse, driven by stress and impatience, and now she couldn't take it back. She tried to rationalize her behavior, telling herself that the old man was probably fine, that it wasn't really that serious. But deep down, she knew. She had crossed a line that she never thought she would cross. The next day, Sarah found herself driving past the grocery store looking for any sign of the elderly man. She didn't know his name or where he lived, but she felt compelled to know if he was okay. When she didn't see him, she tried to put the incident out of her mind and return to her normal routine. However, the guilt began to manifest in unexpected ways. Sarah became irritable with her family, snapping at her daughter over minor issues and picking fights with her husband about trivial matters. She started having trouble sleeping and found herself constantly checking the local news, afraid that she might see a report about an injured elderly man. 2 weeks after the incident, Sarah made an appointment with Dr. Reynolds, claiming she was having anxiety issues and needed something to help her sleep. During the appointment, she found herself on the verge of confessing what she had done, but each time she opened her mouth to speak the words, fear held her back. Dr. Reynolds prescribed a mild sleep aid and suggested that Sarah consider talking to someone about whatever was causing her stress. He recommended a therapist, but Sarah declined, insisting that she just needed help sleeping and that everything else in her life was fine. As Sarah left the doctor's office that day, she didn't notice the elderly man in the wheelchair being helped into the elevator by his adult son. It was Henry Morrison coming for his regular checkup following the incident in the parking lot. He had been more shaken by the encounter than he admitted to his family, and his son David had insisted on accompanying him to all his appointments since then. The web of consequences from those few seconds of cruelty was beginning to weave itself around everyone involved, and none of them realized how their lives were about to intersect in ways they never could have imagined. Tommy Peterson had always been a curious and observant child, but the incident he witnessed in the grocery store parking lot had changed something inside him. For weeks after seeing the well-dressed woman push the elderly man, Tommy found himself studying the faces of adults around him, wondering what secrets they might be hiding behind their smiles. His mother, Lisa, had noticed the change in her son's behavior. Tommy, who was usually chatty and energetic, had become quiet and thoughtful. When she asked him about it, he would simply say he was thinking about the mean lady and the hurt man. Lisa had tried to explain that sometimes people make mistakes, and that the important thing was to learn from them. But Tommy seemed unconvinced that what he saw was just a mistake. One evening, while Lisa was preparing dinner, Tommy approached her with a serious expression on his young face. "Mommy," he said, tugging on her apron, "what happens to people who hurt others and don't say sorry?" Lisa knelt down to Tommy's eye level, concerned by the weight of his question. "Well, sweetheart, sometimes people feel very bad inside when they do something wrong. And sometimes other people find out about the bad thing and try to make sure it doesn't happen again." Tommy nodded solemnly. "But what if nobody knows except me?" The question broke Lisa's heart. Her 7-year-old son was grappling with a moral burden that many adults would struggle to handle. She realized that simply telling Tommy to forget about what he saw wasn't going to work. The incident had clearly made a deep impression on him, and he needed to understand that there were ways to address wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Sarah's guilt continued to consume her daily life. She had started avoiding the grocery store altogether, driving an extra 15 minutes to shop at a different location. Every time she saw an elderly person struggling with something, she felt a pang of shame and remorse. Her husband, Michael, had begun to notice her changed behavior, but attributed it to stress from their daughter's recent troubles at school. Sarah's relationship with her 16-year-old daughter, Emma, had become increasingly strained. Emma was already dealing with the consequences of being caught cheating on her biology exam, and now she had to cope with her mother's sudden mood swings and constant criticism. During one particularly tense dinner, Emma finally snapped, "What is wrong with you lately, Mom? You've been acting weird for weeks. Did something happen?" Sarah's fork clattered against her plate as she looked up sharply at her daughter. For a moment, she considered telling Emma everything, using her daughter's recent mistake as a bridge to her own confession. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she deflected the question and accused Emma of being disrespectful. The argument that followed was fierce and painful, with Emma storming off to her room and slamming the door. Michael tried to mediate, but Sarah was too overwrought to think clearly. That night, she took 2 of the sleeping pills Dr. Reynolds had prescribed instead of 1. 3 weeks after the incident, Tommy's class took a field trip to the local community center, where they were learning about helping elderly and disabled people in their neighborhood. The program was run by volunteers from various organizations, including the Riverside Hills Senior Center. As Tommy sat in the circle with his classmates, listening to a presentation about treating elderly people with kindness and respect, he felt his chest tighten with the weight of his secret. The presenter, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, was explaining how elderly people often felt vulnerable and needed extra care and consideration from younger, stronger people. Sometimes, Mrs. Chen said, Older people move slowly or need help with things that seem easy to us. The most important thing we can do is be patient and kind, even when we're in a hurry. Tommy raised his hand tentatively. Mrs. Chen smiled and called on him. Yes, dear? What should you do if you see someone being mean to an old person? Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Chen's expression grew serious. That's a very important question. If you see someone being unkind or hurting an elderly person, you should tell a trusted adult right away. Adults need to know about these things so they can help and make sure it doesn't happen again. Tommy nodded, but his teacher, Miss Rodriguez, noticed how pale he had become. After the presentation, she pulled Tommy aside and gently asked if there was something he wanted to talk about. For the first time since the incident, Tommy found himself telling the whole story to someone other than his mother. Miss Rodriguez listened carefully as Tommy described the woman in the nice clothes who pushed the old man with the shaky hands. She could see that carrying this secret had been weighing heavily on the young boy. Miss Rodriguez knew she had to handle this situation carefully. She thanked Tommy for trusting her with the information and assured him that he had done the right thing by speaking up. She promised to talk to his mother about what they should do next. That afternoon, Miss Rodriguez called Lisa Peterson and requested a meeting. When Lisa arrived at the school, she found her son sitting quietly in the classroom, while his teacher explained the conversation they had shared. I think Tommy needs to know that adults will take action when children report wrongdoing, Miss Rodriguez said. He's been carrying this burden for weeks and it's clearly affecting him. But more importantly, if this really happened the way Tommy describes, there may be an elderly man out there who needs support or justice. Lisa felt a mixture of pride and concern for her son. She was proud that Tommy had the courage to speak up about something he knew was wrong, but she was worried about the implications of moving forward. What if they couldn't find the elderly man? What if the woman denied everything? What if Tommy had misunderstood what he saw? But as she looked at her son's serious face, Lisa realized that the lesson Tommy learned from this situation would shape his character for years to come. If she taught him that speaking up about wrongdoing was pointless or dangerous, he might never find the courage to stand up for others again. That evening, Lisa sat down with Tommy and explained that they were going to try to find the elderly man he had seen. She told him that it might take time and that they might not succeed, but that it was important to try to help when someone had been hurt. Tommy's face lit up for the first time in weeks. Really, Mommy? We're going to help the hurt man? Lisa nodded, though her stomach was churning with nervousness about what they were about to undertake. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to try to make things right. Lisa Peterson had never imagined she would find herself playing detective, but her son's unwavering determination to help the elderly man he had witnessed being pushed gave her no choice. She started by calling the grocery store where the incident had occurred, hoping they might have security footage or incident reports from that day. The store manager, a helpful woman named Carol Williams, listened to Lisa's story with growing concern. While she couldn't share security footage without a police report, she did remember an incident from several weeks ago where an elderly customer had reported feeling dizzy and confused in the parking lot. The man had mentioned something about falling, but the details were vague. Carol provided Lisa with the date and approximate time of the incident, which matched Tommy's account perfectly. She also mentioned that the elderly customer was a regular who usually shopped on Tuesday mornings, and that he often struggled with mobility issues. Armed with this information, Lisa decided to visit the store the following Tuesday morning, hoping to encounter the man Tommy had described. She brought Tommy with her, reasoning that he would be able to identify the victim better than anyone else. They arrived at the grocery store at 9 in the morning and positioned themselves near the entrance where they could observe customers coming and going. Tommy was excited but nervous, clutching his mother's hand as they watched for the man with the shaky hands who moved slowly. After an hour of waiting, Tommy suddenly squeezed Lisa's hand tightly. "There he is, Mommy," he whispered, pointing toward an elderly man being helped out of a car by a younger man who appeared to be his adult son. Lisa's heart raced as she watched Henry Morrison carefully make his way toward the store entrance, leaning heavily on a walker. His movements were indeed shaky, just as Tommy had described, and she could see the careful, protective way his son stayed close beside him. Approaching strangers about such a sensitive topic felt incredibly awkward, but Lisa knew this might be their only chance to find the man Tommy had been worrying about for weeks. She took a deep breath and walked over to where Henry and his son David were pausing near the shopping carts. "Excuse me," Lisa said gently. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think my son may have witnessed an incident involving you several weeks ago in this parking lot. Would you have a few minutes to talk?" David Morrison immediately became protective, moving slightly in front of his father. "What kind of incident?" he asked suspiciously. Lisa quickly explained that Tommy had seen an elderly man being pushed by a woman, and that they had been trying to find him ever since to make sure he was okay. She emphasized that Tommy had been very upset by what he saw and wanted to help. Henry Morrison's eyes grew wide with recognition and emotion. "Someone saw. What happened to me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. David's expression changed from suspicion to concern. "Dad, what is she talking about? You said you just fell that day." Henry looked down at Tommy, who was standing quietly behind his mother, and then back at Lisa. "I didn't want to worry you, son," he said to David. "I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. My memory isn't what it used to be, and I thought maybe I had imagined it or misunderstood what happened." Tommy stepped forward, his young voice clear and confident despite his nervousness. "The lady in the fancy dress pushed you when you were trying to get your wallet. She had a big purse and she was talking on her phone really loud. After she pushed you, she gave you your wallet and then drove away in a shiny car." Henry's eyes filled with tears as he realized that he hadn't imagined the incident after all. For weeks he had questioned his own memory, wondering if his Parkinson's disease was affecting his perception of reality. Having a witness, especially an innocent child, validate his experience was both vindicating and overwhelming. David was shocked and angry. His father had been struggling with depression and self-doubt since the incident, questioning whether he was becoming paranoid or confused. David had noticed his father's increased anxiety about going out in public and his reluctance to do things independently, but he had attributed it to the natural progression of his condition. "Dad, why didn't you tell me someone had hurt you?" David asked, his voice filled with pain and frustration. Henry shrugged sadly. "I thought maybe I was losing my mind. The woman looked so respectable, so normal. I couldn't understand why someone like that would want to hurt an old man like me. I started thinking maybe I had done something to deserve it, or maybe I was just getting confused." Lisa's heart broke as she listened to Henry describe the self-doubt and confusion he had experienced. She realized that the woman's actions had caused far more damage than just the physical push. She had shaken an elderly man's confidence in his own perceptions and made him question his place in the world. Tommy, meanwhile, was studying Henry's face intently. "Are you okay now?" he asked with the direct concern that only children can express. "I was worried about you. I kept thinking about how scared you looked." Henry reached out with a shaky hand and gently touched Tommy's shoulder. "I'm better now, young man. Thank you for caring about me. It means more than you know to have someone who saw what really happened." David pulled out his phone and started asking Lisa for details about the incident. He wanted to know exactly what day it had happened, what time, and whether Tommy could describe the woman or her vehicle in more detail. Lisa could see that he was thinking about involving the police, and she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I think we should report this," David said firmly. Whether she meant to hurt him or not, she left the scene after causing harm to an elderly, disabled person. "That's not acceptable." Henry seemed hesitant about involving law enforcement. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone," he said. "Maybe she was just having a bad day." But David was adamant. "Dad, look how this has affected you. You've barely left the house without me since this happened. You've been questioning your own memory and judgment. She doesn't get to hurt you and walk away without consequences just because she was having a bad day." Lisa found herself caught between wanting to support Henry's right to seek justice and worrying about the impact this might have on Tommy if it turned into a lengthy legal process. She also couldn't help wondering about the woman who had pushed Henry. What kind of person was she? Was this typical behavior for her, or had she truly just made a terrible mistake in a moment of stress and frustration? As they talked, other shoppers moved around them. going about their normal Tuesday morning routines, unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of a situation that would soon change multiple lives in unexpected ways. Tommy, tired of the adult conversation but pleased that they had found the hurt man, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Can we help him now, Mommy?" he asked simply. Lisa looked down at her son's earnest face and realized that for Tommy, the solution was clear and straightforward. Someone had been hurt, they had found him, and now they needed to help him feel better. The adult complications of legal proceedings and moral ambiguity were beyond his understanding, but his basic sense of right and wrong was unshakable. The police station was not a place Lisa Peterson had ever expected to visit with her 7-year-old son, but here they were, sitting in a small conference room while Detective Maria Santos reviewed Tommy's statement about what he had witnessed. David Morrison sat beside his father Henry, holding a folder of medical records that documented Henry's condition following the incident. Detective Santos was a patient woman with 2 children of her own, and she understood how to talk to Tommy in a way that made him feel comfortable while still gathering the information she needed. Tommy had drawn a picture of what he saw, complete with stick figures that showed the woman pushing the man near the cars. "Tommy, you've been very helpful," Detective Santos said kindly. "Can you tell me anything else about the woman? Was she tall or short? Did you notice what color her hair was?" Tommy scrunched up his face in concentration. "She was taller than my mom, but not super tall. Her hair was brown and shiny and she had sparkly earrings. Her car was silver and really clean." Lisa was impressed by how many details her son had retained, even though he had been quite far away when the incident occurred. Detective Santos made notes and asked if Tommy thought he would recognize the woman if he saw her again. "Yes," Tommy said confidently. "I remember her face because she looked really mad and then really scared after she pushed him." Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Matthews was having another sleepless night. The guilt had been eating away at her for over a month now, and she was finding it increasingly difficult to function normally. Her husband Michael had started asking more pointed questions about her mood and behavior, and her daughter Emma had begun avoiding her entirely. Sarah had returned to Dr. Reynolds twice, asking for stronger medication to help with her anxiety and insomnia. Dr. Reynolds was becoming concerned about Sarah's deteriorating mental state and had again suggested that she speak with a therapist about whatever was troubling her. During her latest appointment, Sarah had come closer than ever to confessing what she had done. She sat in Dr. Reynolds' office, tears streaming down her face, trying to find the words to explain the terrible things she had done in a moment of frustration and selfishness. "Sarah, I can see that something is causing you tremendous distress," Dr. Reynolds said gently. "Whatever it is, talking about it might help you find a way to address it constructively." Sarah took a shaky breath. What if someone did something really bad but didn't mean to hurt anyone? What if they made a terrible mistake and now they don't know how to fix it? Dr. Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "In my experience, the things that torment us most are usually things that can be addressed if we have the courage to face them honestly. Guilt and shame have a way of growing larger in the darkness, but they often shrink when exposed to the light." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "But what if coming forward would ruin everything? What if it would hurt innocent people?" "Sometimes," Dr. Reynolds said carefully, "we tell ourselves that we're protecting others when we're really just protecting ourselves. And sometimes the people we think we're protecting are actually being hurt more by our silence than they would be by our honesty." As Sarah left the appointment that day, she made a decision. She was going to drive to the grocery store where the incident had occurred and see if she could find the elderly man. She didn't know exactly what she would say to him, but she knew she had to try to make amends somehow. However, when Sarah arrived at the grocery store, she learned from a cashier who remembered her asking about an elderly customer that the man had been coming to the store with his son recently, and they had been asking questions about a woman who had been involved in some kind of incident. Sarah's blood ran cold. The old man remembered what had happened, and he was actively looking for information about her. She sat in her car in the parking lot, paralyzed by fear and indecision. Part of her wanted to march into the store and confess everything, but another part of her was terrified of the consequences. While Sarah sat in her car struggling with her conscience, Detective Santos was reviewing the case file she had started for Henry Morrison's assault. The grocery store had provided security footage from the day in question, though the camera angle didn't clearly show the incident itself. However, the footage did show a woman matching Tommy's description in the parking lot at the right time, and it showed her license plate number. Running the plate through the system, Detective Santos quickly identified the vehicle owner as Sarah Matthews, a resident of the upscale Riverside Hills neighborhood. A quick background check showed no prior criminal history, which was typical for cases like this. Often people who committed acts like this were otherwise law-abiding citizens who had acted impulsively in a moment of stress or frustration. Detective Santos decided to pay Sarah a visit at her home rather than calling her to the station. Her experienced people were more likely to be honest when approached in a non-threatening environment, and she wanted to give Sarah a chance to explain her side of the story before making any formal charges. The next morning, Detective Santos rang the doorbell at the Matthews family home. Sarah answered the door in her bathrobe, looking haggard and exhausted. When Detective Santos introduced herself and mentioned that she was investigating an incident at the grocery store involving an elderly man, Sarah's face went completely white. "Mrs. Matthews, I'd like to ask you a few questions about an incident that occurred on March 15th at the Riverside grocery store. Were you there that day?" Sarah's hands began to tremble. She looked past Detective Santos to where her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was watering her garden, clearly within earshot of their conversation. The reality of her situation was crashing down around her. I think I should call my lawyer," Sarah stammered. Detective Santos nodded understandingly. "That's your right, Mrs. Matthews. But I want you to know that we have a witness who saw what happened, and we have security footage that places you at the scene. The elderly gentleman you encountered has been quite shaken by the experience, and his family is very concerned about his well-being." Sarah felt her knees go weak. A witness. Someone had seen what she had done, and now everyone was going to know. Her husband would find out. Her daughter would find out. Her friends and neighbors would all learn that she had pushed a sick old man in a parking lot. "Can I ask who the witness is?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Detective Santos hesitated for a moment, then decided that honesty might encourage Sarah to be forthcoming. "A 7-year-old boy who was in the parking lot with his mother. He's been very concerned about the elderly gentleman ever since he witnessed the incident." Sarah closed her eyes and leaned against her doorframe. A child had seen her at her worst moment, and that child had cared enough about a stranger to speak up. The irony was not lost on her that a young boy had shown more moral courage than she had been able to muster in weeks of guilt and self-recrimination. "Detective," Sarah said, quietly, "I think we need to talk." Sarah Matthews sat across from Detective Santos in her living room, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The weight of her secret felt different now that someone else knew about it. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't carrying the burden alone, though the fear of what would happen next was almost overwhelming. "I need you to understand that I'm not a bad person," Sarah began, her voice shaking. "I know that sounds ridiculous given what I did, but I've never hurt anyone before in my life. That day, everything just felt like it was falling apart." Detective Santos listened patiently as Sarah described the stress she had been under, the problems with her daughter, the pressure she felt to maintain her perfect life, and the moment of cruel impatience that had led her to push Henry Morrison. Sarah's confession was detailed and honest, and Detective Santos could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. "The worst part," Sarah continued, wiping tears from her face, "is that I drove away. I saw that he was confused and scared, and I just left him there. Every night since then, I've wondered if he was badly hurt, if he was afraid to go out, if he told his family what happened. I've been going crazy thinking about it." Detective Santos made notes as Sarah spoke, but she also found herself feeling some sympathy for the woman sitting across from her. She had seen many cases of assault, and most of them involved people who showed little remorse for their actions. Sarah's guilt and self-torment were clearly genuine, though that didn't excuse what she had done. "Mrs. Matthews, I appreciate your honesty, But I need you to understand that Mr. Morrison has suffered significant emotional trauma from this incident. He's been questioning his own memory and judgment, and he's become afraid to go out alone. Your actions had consequences beyond that moment in the parking lot. Sarah nodded miserably. I know. I've thought about that every single day. I kept wanting to find him and apologize, but I was too scared. I was afraid he wouldn't remember me, or that he would call the police, or that I would just make everything worse. Well, he did remember you, and his family did call the police, Detective Santos said matter-of-factly. But there's something else you should know. The witness who reported this incident was a 7-year-old boy who has been worried about Mr. Morrison for weeks. This child was so concerned about what he saw that he told his teacher, his mother, and eventually helped us find Mr. Morrison. A 7-year-old boy showed more courage and moral conviction than you did. Sarah felt as if she had been slapped. The detective's words stung because they were absolutely true. While she had been wallowing in self-pity and fear, a child had been taking action to help someone who was hurt. The contrast between her cowardice and the boy's bravery was stark and humbling. What happens now? Sarah asked quietly. Detective Santos explained that charges would likely be filed, though the exact nature of those charges would depend on several factors, including Mr. Morrison's wishes and Sarah's willingness to cooperate. She mentioned that assault on an elderly person was taken very seriously by the court system, and that Sarah should definitely contact a lawyer. After Detective Santos left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, staring at the walls of her expensive house. She thought about the little boy who had spoken up for a stranger, and she realized that she had been given an opportunity to finally do the right thing. That evening, when Michael came home from work, Sarah was waiting for him in his study. She had spent the afternoon thinking about how to tell him what had happened, and she had decided that the complete truth was the only way forward. Michael's reaction was exactly what Sarah had feared. He was shocked, disappointed, and angry. But underneath his initial reaction, Sarah could see that he was also hurt by the fact that she had hidden this from him for so long. "Sarah, how could you not tell me about this?" he asked, pacing back and forth across the room. "We've been married for 18 years. I thought we told each other everything." "I was ashamed," Sarah said simply. "I was terrified that you would think differently about me, that Emma would be embarrassed, that our friends would judge us. I've spent so much energy trying to maintain our image that I forgot who I actually am underneath all of that." Emma, who had overheard parts of their conversation from her room upstairs, appeared in the doorway of the study. At 16, she was old enough to understand the seriousness of what her mother had done, but she was also dealing with her own recent experience of making a serious mistake. "Mom, is it true that you hurt an old man and didn't tell anyone?" Emma asked, her voice small and confused. Sarah looked at her daughter and saw her own shame reflected back at her. Emma was facing consequences at school for cheating, and now she was learning that her mother had done something far worse and had hidden it for weeks. "Yes, Emma, it's true. I made a terrible mistake, and then I made it worse by not taking responsibility for it right away." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she spoke again. "At school, they told us that integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard or scary. I guess I understand now why you were so upset about my cheating. But Mom, what are you going to do now?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that this was a defining moment not just for her but for her family. The choice she made now would teach Emma a lesson about accountability, responsibility, and courage that would last a lifetime. "I'm going to do everything I can to make this right," Sarah said firmly. "I'm going to apologize to Mr. Morrison and his family. I'm going to face whatever legal consequences come my way, and I'm going to find a way to help other elderly people so that something good can come from this horrible situation." Michael sat down heavily in his chair. "This is going to change everything, Sarah. Your arrest will be in the newspaper. People at the country club will know. Emma's classmates will find out. Are you prepared for all of that?" Sarah thought about the 7-year-old boy who had been brave enough to speak up for a stranger, and about Henry Morrison, who had been living with confusion and self-doubt because of her actions. She thought about the person she wanted to be versus the person she had been acting like. "Yes," she said with more conviction than she had felt in weeks. "I'm prepared for that. It's time to stop caring more about what other people think than about doing the right thing." The next morning, Sarah called Detective Santos and asked if it would be possible to meet with Henry Morrison and his family. She wanted to apologize, in person, and to ask what she could do to help make amends for what she had done. Detective Santos was surprised by the request, but agreed to contact the Morrison family to see if they would be willing to meet. She warned Sarah that they might not be interested in hearing from her, and that even if they agreed to meet, it might not go the way Sarah hoped. But Sarah was determined to face the consequences of her actions head-on. For the first time since the incident in the parking lot, she felt like she was moving in the right direction, even though she knew the path ahead would be difficult and painful. The community center meeting room felt enormous despite its modest size. Sarah Matthews sat at one end of a long table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Henry Morrison sat at the other end with his son David beside him. Detective Santos sat nearby, ready to moderate if needed, and Lisa Peterson had brought Tommy, though she wasn't sure if involving him in this meeting was the right decision. Tommy had insisted on coming when he learned that the woman who pushed the old man wanted to say sorry. His simple 7-year-old logic told him that this was exactly what should happen when someone did something wrong. He had been excited about the meeting, viewing it as the natural resolution to the problem he had been carrying for so many weeks. Sarah looked across the table at Henry Morrison and felt her breath catch in her throat. In the parking lot, she had seen him as an obstacle, an inconvenience that was preventing her from getting what she wanted. Now, sitting in the bright fluorescent light of the meeting room, she could see him as he truly was, a fragile elderly man with kind eyes and trembling hands who was dealing with a degenerative disease that already made life challenging enough. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know if there are words adequate enough to express how sorry I am for what I did to you. I was having a terrible day, but that's no excuse for taking my frustration out on you. What I did was cruel and cowardly, and I've thought about it every single day since it happened." Henry studied Sarah's face carefully. He had spent weeks wondering about the woman who had pushed him, trying to understand what kind of person would hurt a stranger and then drive away. Looking at her now, he could see genuine remorse and anguish in her expression. "Why didn't you help me?" Henry asked quietly. "After you pushed me, why didn't you stay to make sure I was okay?" Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I was scared and selfish. I was afraid of getting in trouble, and I convinced myself that you were fine. I told myself that it wasn't that serious, but I knew better. I knew I had hurt you, and I chose to protect myself instead of helping you." David Morrison had been angry about this meeting from the beginning. He didn't want his father to have to relive the trauma of the incident, and he wasn't interested in hearing excuses from the woman who had hurt his dad. But as he watched Sarah's obvious distress and listened to her honest answers to his father's questions, he found his anger mixing with confusion. Tommy, meanwhile, was watching the interaction between Sarah and Henry with intense interest. This was his first real-life lesson in how adults handled serious mistakes and forgiveness, and he was absorbing every word. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah continued, "I want you to know that what I did has haunted me every day since it happened. I've been seeing a doctor because I couldn't sleep or function normally, but I also want you to know that I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. What you've gone through because of my actions is far worse than what I've been dealing with." Henry was quiet for a long moment, and everyone in the room waited to see how he would respond. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Mrs. Matthews, what you did to me was wrong. It hurt me physically, but it hurt me in other ways too. I started questioning whether I was losing my mind, whether I could trust my own memory. I became afraid to go out alone because I didn't feel safe around other people anymore." Sarah nodded, accepting his words without trying to defend herself. "But," Henry continued, "I can see that you're genuinely sorry, and I've learned something important from all of this. I've learned that there are good people in the world who will stand up for others when they see something wrong happening." He turned to look at Tommy, who was sitting quietly beside his mother. This young man saw what happened to me, and he didn't forget about it or ignore it. He made sure that someone listened to him and helped me. At 7 years old, he showed more courage than many adults would have. Tommy smiled shyly and looked down at his hands. So, Henry said, turning back to Sarah, I want to know what you're planning to do now. How are you going to make sure that something like this never happens again? Sarah had been preparing for this question. I'm going to plead guilty to whatever charges are filed against me. I'm not going to make you go through a trial or force you to relive this experience. I'm also going to start volunteering at the senior center, if they'll have me. I want to spend time helping elderly people instead of hurting them. David Morrison spoke up for the first time. What about your family, your job, your reputation? Are you prepared for all of that to be affected? My family is supporting me in doing the right thing, Sarah said, glancing at Detective Santos. My husband and daughter are learning the same lesson I'm learning, that integrity matters more than image. As for my reputation, I'd rather be known as someone who made a terrible mistake, but took responsibility for it than as someone who hurt an innocent person and got away with it. Lisa Peterson had been quiet throughout most of the meeting, but now she felt compelled to speak. I want to thank you, Mrs. Matthews, for being honest with my son about what happened. Tommy has been carrying this burden for weeks, and seeing you take responsibility helps him understand that adults can make mistakes but still do the right thing in the end. Tommy looked up at his mother and then at Sarah. Are you going to be okay? He asked Sarah with the simple concern that children express so naturally. Sarah was surprised by the question and touched by the boy's continued compassion, even for someone who had done something wrong. I think I'm going to be better than I've been in a long time, Tommy. Because of you speaking up, I'm finally able to face what I did and try to make it right. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Detective Santos explaining the legal process that would follow, and everyone discussing how they wanted to move forward. By the end, something unexpected had happened. A connection had formed between people who had been brought together by a moment of cruelty, but were now united in a desire to create something positive from the experience. Henry Morrison agreed not to pursue the harshest possible charges against Sarah, recognizing her genuine remorse and commitment to making amends. Sarah followed through on her promise to plead guilty and to begin volunteering at the senior center. Tommy learned that speaking up for others could lead to healing and justice, even when the situation seemed complicated and scary. 6 months later, Sarah was working regularly at the Riverside Hills Senior Center, helping with activities and providing companionship to elderly residents. She had lost some friends and faced social consequences for her actions, but she had gained something more valuable: a clear conscience and a sense of purpose. Henry Morrison's confidence gradually returned, especially after he began participating in the senior center programs where Sarah volunteered. Seeing her dedication to helping others gave him a sense that justice had been served in a way that was more meaningful than punishment alone could have provided. Tommy Peterson became something of a local hero, invited to speak at school assemblies about the importance of speaking up when witnessing wrongdoing. His simple act of courage had rippled out to affect multiple lives in ways he never could have imagined. The story became a lesson for the entire community about accountability, forgiveness, and the power that each person has to choose between silence and action when confronted with injustice. It proved that sometimes the smallest voices can create the biggest changes, and that it's never too late to do the right thing.